Welcome to Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. There you go. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Of course, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow, rate, review, do all the things. Really easy to find out how to do that. We have it all in our show notes. Check out the new Substack. Yeah, just do it. It all helps so we can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with Andrew Heaton. Andrew Heaton is the host of the Political Orphanage, along with, I think, 1,438 other podcasts, plus or minus. And he, the podcast Political Orphanage is, it's very much aligned with what we're trying to do here, as it's described, an often funny politics podcast designed for people sick of red team versus blue team hysterics. Heaton, which he likes to be called, is also a comedian, author, political satirist, and a former congressional staffer. And he is the best-selling author of Laughter is Better Than Communism, along with 2 novels, and his latest book, Tribalism is Dumb. That just sounds so Chevy Chase. Tribalism is Dumb, which we'll discuss today. Now, nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Nice to see you, too. Thank you for having me on, Corey. I also want to just let your listeners know, you already suspected that Corey is a nice guy. Let me confirm this to you. I messed up the time that we were recording this by an hour and called Corey, assuming he was going to scream at me for being a dick with his time, and quite the opposite happened. So I'm delighted to be here and delighted that you were so gracious to me as a host of this program.
So the truth is, I am a dick, and people can confirm that. I just had nothing better to do, man.
Nice. That's you. Well, this is how I date. I track down ladies that have nothing better to do. I go, listen, it's me or Netflix. Which one do you want? I come with ravioli.
Terrific. Yes, we are the alternative to Netflix. So in all seriousness, one of the first things I was curious about, you dedicated the latest book, Tribalism is Dumb, to your dad, Joe Heaton. So I was hoping you could tell us about Joe and how he maybe inspired you to write a book like Tribalism is Dumb.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to do that. Nobody else has asked me that. I might tear up. So my dad's a federal judge, and he came out of that through a political background. He was in the Oklahoma State Legislature when I was a kid. He was the minority floor leader in the House, and went on from that to be a prosecutor, for which he was appointed by the president because he was U.S. attorney. So he was a political for all of my childhood and boyhood up until he became a non-political federal judge. And so while my father has always been interested in politics and has always had his own views, his own thoughts, many of which I have inherited by dint of being his child, as I got older, I appreciated that his outlook has always been one that was steeped in understanding the system and trying to improve the system rather than trying to identify enemies to destroy. And I recall when I was in college, there was a former high-placed member of the House that was from the opposing party when my dad had been there. And I ran into him, and he just, was like, oh, I remember your dad from back in the House. We served together. I was on the other side of the aisle. And I mentioned that to my dad, and he went, he was one of the most talented legislators I've ever worked with. That particular guy ended up having to leave under rather poor circumstances because he had an alcohol problem. And my father describing somebody that was his sparring partner, who was the leader of the opposition while he was active in politics, and speaking about him as a talented guy. And it was so sad that his career had ended that way, and how much respect my father had for him. I was truly touched by that. And I wish that we had more of that today. And that was kind of what I was looking to channel in this, of being able to understand that there are lots of people that we share this country with that are good and intelligent people. And the fact that we disagree with them is not a negation of their humanity. A lot of the time, what we're doing is we might even share broadly the same values, but we're arguing about which of those agreed upon values we're going to prioritize when they come into conflict, or we're arguing about the methodology to arrive at a positive state that we all want. And I feel that my father's always done that. It's like on the court now that he's a federal judge. His best friend for years, he was appointed by George W. Bush. His best friend on the court for years until he died was appointed by Jimmy Carter, who's a Democrat. I never saw any of this raw partisan rancor and malice from my father. And so I think the way I phrase it in the book and the dedication is to my father and to all of the other adults in the room. And I wish we had more adults in the room. I'm tearing up, but thank you for the opportunity to bring that up, Corey.
Sure thing. Yeah, and you touched on a lot of things that you cover in the book. You know, as you describe this, one of my questions and what we've been working on here since 2020 and on the podcast, but even for 20 years prior to that, just in my personal life, is how diagnosing this societal civic problem and then figuring out what we can do about it. And we'll talk about that because the book does provide a great diagnosis as well as some prescriptions. But before we do that, I was also curious. So, is your dad the way that you first got interested in politics, or more broadly, our shared civic life together, or were there other things, teachers or subjects that you were studying that first got you interested?
I think he was probably the entree. That was, when you're a kid, you tend to idolize your dad. A lot of his interests are your interest. Since he was in the state legislature, I grew up going to the state legislature, and I think my brain probably is, even though I myself am a quasi-successful pseudo-comedian, I think if I were less funny than I am, I probably could have been an attorney or maybe an economist. So I tended to link up in interests with my father, and so yeah, I think I probably got started with that. Maybe the first political book I read at my father's instigation, and then have kind of been going on my own journey since that time. But yeah, it probably started that way, and have been involved in it for many years, kind of going in and out. I paged when I was a kid in the state capitol, and then later worked for the United States Congress, and now I'm a political satirist that makes fun of it, which is much easier to do. Yeah. But have always just kind of been. I'm really interested in how systems work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, now that you mention that, there are things that my dad did to keep my interest in politics active. And I don't even know if it was a conscious choice. I know that he and my mom did make a conscious choice to raise us as independent thinkers. And he would say, "God damn it, I didn't think you would be that independent." The whole, I was raised observantly Jewish and I became a fucking Christian, a cursing Christian.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that, Corey.
Oh, you didn't know that part?
When did that happen?
Yeah.
Like you did a bonus episode of my program, and it was just after the October 10th slayings in Israel.
7th, yeah.
And excuse me, October 7th slayings. And you were very torn up about that, understandably. And so I did not know that you had any. Did you become Christian since then, or is that like, there's home team, but there's the theology team, or
It's all the same team to me. It's just that I happen to believe when I was 29 or 30 years old, I was doing some voracious reading, and I still had some kind of open, vacuumous questions, existential questions, to which what I recognized as the Rabbi Jesus answered in much more profound, coherent, consistent ways than other rabbis that I had studied for some of these questions. So that was I was going to say that was a problem, but some people would look at it as the makings of a really great sitcom. Going home and telling my Jewish parents from New York that your son's a Christian now. That was so yeah. Okay, so before we get into the book, this is my last question, and because there's a lot to dive into here. You are podcastically prolific.
Thank you.
Yes. How do you prep differently for all the different podcasts that you have, or do you have a pretty consistent way that you go about it?
I prep a little bit differently depending on the podcast. So I tend to start a podcast, do it for a while, and then kind of put it away. The one that's been consistent from the beginning that I do every week without interruption is the Political Orphanage. That's my main podcast. I do a sci-fi podcast, but I now do that monthly.
Okay.
As I just don't have time to do it. And then I occasionally have a funny history podcast I do with my friend, but we do that in spurts where we'll record several of them and like wait 2 years and not do them anymore. And then I do a pundit show where I'm a talking head and I argue about politics on Wednesdays called We're Not Wrong. Between the Political Orphanage and We're Not Wrong, the level of research that I do is different. So with the Political Orphanage, I'm typically either interviewing an author or I am doing a monologue episode that requires a tremendous amount of research. So if I'm interviewing an author, I try hard to read at least 50% of their book, but generally 70% or more of their book, because I want to ask very good questions. And I can tell right off the bat that you're in the same camp and probably excelling and probably beating me in that standard. I don't want to go into a book where I talk to somebody and I'm like, so, Penguin, are they a good publisher? Like I want to get into the meat. I want to ask good questions when I get in there. And I figured out that being fairly independent, being fairly nonpartisan, I don't have the ability to put my back to the wall and go, when in doubt, be conservative, or when in doubt, be progressive. Like I don't have that ability, nor can I send up a signal flare of like, look how conservative, look how liberal I am. And so what I've found out is like what I can do is just a ton of research. And political hacks don't tend to do that. Partisan hacks don't tend to do the research because it's very labor intensive. They can just come up with intense ways to signal that they are ravenously opposed to the enemy team. And so that's kind of my superpower and my failing simultaneously. So, like for example, when Roe v. Wade got overturned, I didn't want to talk about that. I don't think I have any particularly unique insight on pro-life versus pro-choice, and I also know my audience is divided. I was like, I don't really want to get into this. But then I went, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read Dobbs v. Jackson. I'm just going to read the Supreme Court case, and then I'm going to read through Roe v. Wade, and then I'm going to write down any legal phrases that I'm unfamiliar with, and I'll research those, and I will just tell people this is the underlying framework that previously existed. This is the new jurisdictional rationale which overturned that. And I was terrified when I hit the button to publish it. I went to sleep that night. I hit the schedule button and I went to sleep and I was like, okay, this could all collapse tomorrow. I could piss off a ton of people. I might have to go get a real job that doesn't involve air conditioning. And I found that the audience across the board loved it because so few people were actually taking the time to research it. It was what most people wanted to do is square off and be very pro-life or very pro-choice. And I get that. I'm not saying you're a hack if you're in that camp. But if you're a hack, that's a very easy place to go to. And so I tend to do a lot of research on the Political Orphanage. And if I do monologue episodes like Dobbs v. Jackson or whatever the thing is, last week I did a deep dive on how other countries handle housing to try to kind of figure out like what are other possible solutions that we could do? What is the underlying problem? So those are very research heavy. When I do We're Not Wrong on Wednesdays, that's a lot more casual and it's designed that way. My colleague or my co-hosts and I, when we decided to do that show, Jen and I agreed to do it only if we didn't have to research more than an hour beforehand on a regular basis, because we didn't have the time to do it. Now, I will sometimes do that where some question will be posed and I'll go, ooh, I don't feel really good on my economics here. So I'll take 8 hours on the odd occasion to research the hell out of it. How is the German healthcare system different? Like I'll do that. But most of the time though, it's a thing where I get up and I drink coffee, I read the thing, and then I'm ready to go in. So I have very different levels of research that I put into both programs.
Yeah. So I've been mixing in the last year or so, I've been mixing in the monologues. I find those incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Do you tend to script your monologues after all the research, or is it outlined with bullet points and then you riff off the outlines? How do you do that?
I have done that on occasion. I will do that if I'm under intense time constraints. So in the last year, I went to the Republican convention, the Democratic convention, and the Libertarian convention, and did one on J.D. Vance had just been given the nomination. And I did not have time under those constraints to sit down and write a proper monologue, which would probably take me 6 hours maybe.
Yeah.
If I was going to do a 30-minute to an hour-long monologue, like to my standards, if I'm going to do under those circumstances, I would have like tried to read his book. I would have, read his Wikipedia article, read every article I could find about him, and then eventually come up with some thematic thing. So that one was much more shooting from the hip where I outlined it. Ditto with Tim Walls, where maybe it took me 3 hours to put it together. But under normal circumstances, though, where I'm not on the road stressed for time for some reason, I will write them out, and I am I am a veteran enough performer at this point that I can kind of wander off script a little bit, just to give it some color and give it some flexibility so it doesn't seem canned. But
Right.
I'll generally write the whole thing out, yeah, and have it pretty well polished by the time I jump in.
Oh, that's good to know because I've been flipping back and forth between um, outlined improvisation versus scripting, and I'm still working it out. I'm getting my reps in. So we'll see how it goes.
You're
But
you're you're doing a weekly show, Corey?
so this program is twice a week.
Twice
Typically,
a
the
week.
first
Okay.
one we anchor the week on. We've been releasing on Monday night with an interview. This one will come out on Monday night, and then I've been doing Thursday, but I'm thinking maybe I'll shift that to Sunday night and Wednesday night because my
Uh,
Thursdays end up getting if I release it at 5 o'clock my time on Thursday, it gets buried in weekends, and
right.
it's getting depleted a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm rethinking where we are releasing things. But yeah, the midweek ones that I drop are the monologue ones.
Mhm.
So yeah, still working it out. I'm still, like I said, I'm still
Can I give you
developing.
my tiny pointer on that I
Sure.
find useful?
Yeah.
One, I think your instincts are correct to drop it in the morning. I think a significant amount of people listen to podcasts on their way to work.
Yeah.
So you want to drop. I try to drop mine in the morning before the commute starts, and I would much rather drop an episode at 6 a.m. on a Friday than 5 p.m. on a Thursday. I think you're more likely to get people that way. I'll
Interesting. Okay.
on the Patreon feed, because the way I'm funded is by a subscription model. So for patrons, maybe I'll drop it the night before, but I know that because they're fans, they're going to listen to it very likely at some point, regardless when I drop it. But for the main feed, I'll drop it. For the monologues, um, what I try to remember is that I am competing with the entire internet whenever I write a monologue.
Yeah.
So I try to have a really good, oftentimes very um, weird opener. Like I'll let me, this last week I'm kind of talking about like the amount of strife we're going through as a country. I'm planning to do a limited series on assassinations in America.
Okay.
So assassinations and assassination attempts that people aren't familiar with. Everybody knows Lincoln and JFK, but like people probably, I assume no one knows why Garfield got shot. I didn't. And so I'm doing things on that. But like me beginning an episode by going, it was a cold, Andrew Jackson was a skeleton by the time a man tried to shoot him. Like that's a really strong opener, as opposed to like, hey everybody, I'm going to talk about Andrew Jackson today. Like if
So
you
you're
if
doing
you
assassinations, the comedy.
yeah. But I try to, when I'm doing the monologue episodes, I try to have like a really I really I enjoy doing gripping intros that you don't know where they're gonna go.
Okay.
Like I did one 2 years ago. I did a long special on the national debt. Like what happens when the national debt, when the chickens finally come home to roost on the national debt. It was the weirdest introduction I've ever done. It was a half hour on, I think it was a Persian Xerxes, I think, and it was about like how Xerxes had like conquered Babylon, but he was running out of money, and how when he was getting a tour of Babylon, somebody said that like this ancient queen's tomb up above the city ramparts had treasure in it, and he was like, "Great, finally somebody's helping me out." So he broke into the tomb, and he like opened the sarcophagus, and she'd been mummified in honey, and he had them like open it up, and there was a note waiting that said like, if you've opened my tomb, you're profligate and you deserve to go bankrupt or something like that. And it was just this ridiculous like trolling somebody on finances. But if you were listening to the monologue, you had no idea where I was going for
Right.
30 minutes. But within 5 minutes, you're like, I want to know what's going to happen to this Xerxes guy. So I really enjoy doing like oblique historical intros that why is Heaton talking about nuclear winter? Like, where's this going to go? And then at the end, you're like, oh, I see how he got this to eventually wind up on Episcopalianism or whatever he's talking about.
So I was going to make a joke about, oh, you're one of those AM droppers and I'm a PM dropper and you're one of them, and kind of set up the whole
Yeah.
tribalism thing.
That'd be good. That'd
Um,
be good.
But here's the thing. Let me just get into a serious point because it's related to what we're talking about. Is your research? It was clear that you're speaking with a distinct voice. You have a level of wit, and your life in the world of comedy is clear, but you don't have to get 3 pages into the book to realize, oh, this dude is really well researched. So I forget where you alluded to it. Maybe it was at the end in the acknowledgments, but the when you said it took 7 years to write this thing, it made sense because the material that you're drawing from in order to put together this book, it was clear that it was so thoroughly well researched. So just as a bridge from what we were just talking about, how different was it to do the research for this book versus the research that you do for the podcast?
Far more extensive, far more extensive. And that's very, very gratifying. Thank you for saying that. I'm deeply touched by that. Thank you. For listeners, why don't I go ahead and just kind of say what the book is about, so everybody has a touchstone for us. So the book is called Tribalism Is Dumb: Where It Came From, Why It Got So Bad, and What to Do About It. I intentionally picked the title Tribalism Is Dumb because I wanted the title to be pithy so that people would understand that you're not reading a dense anthropological tome. You're reading a comedian re-microwaving a dense anthropological tome for your benefit. But it is, in fact, all of the substance, just with a lot of jokes mixed in. And what I'm attempting to do with the book is figure out, why did we go nuts? What happened? There seems to be some sea shift moment over the last 10, 15 years where politics went from what I was talking about with my dad earlier, where the people that we disagree with are our opponents, to where they are now, where they're existential enemies. And there's a very big difference between an opponent and an enemy. Like, when did that happen? What caused that? And so I divide the book into 3 parts. The first part is the evolutionary basis for why we seek tribes and why we have this innate urge not just to be a part of a tribe, but to fight another tribe. We have an inbuilt desire to proactively seek out and find a nemesis. Where does that come from? The second part is, if this enemy-seeking behavior is an inbuilt part of humanity, then what changed if it's always been there? So I try to figure that out. And then the third part is, well, what do we do about it? So the difference between that and a regular episode is, with a regular episode, I can typically pick one thing and I can get a sufficient amount of information to write about an hour on it, or a book. And with a book, I don't have to really research it. I just have to come up with good ideas for the author of things that I'm interested in. With this book, I had to, I had to do it from what would it be, an induction standpoint. I was using inductive logic as opposed to deductive logic, and kind of starting with, why are people mean to me? And then working my way out from there.
Yeah.
And then it was also difficult in that normally I can course correct on an episode a lot quicker, or I can bring it up. Like if I'm doing on the housing episode I mentioned, just because it's more recent, I talked about, like, hey, here are some, I thought this was going to be the case with the policy. I was wrong. Having researched it now, I was incorrect in my assessment, and it kind of throws my theory off a little bit, and here's some cognitive dissonance. Now, I think on an episode that kind of buys me some credibility by going like, hey, I was seeking this thing. Turns out I was wrong. I'm relaying this to you because I'm not trying to sell you an orthodoxy. I am trying to discover the truth here. With a book, though, it's not that you're being duplicitous. It's just that, like, if you realize that a particular inquiry is not a fruitful line of inquiry, you have to drop it and start over, or go in a more fruitful version. So there were several times where I maybe had a perspective on it, and then I went, you know what, this doesn't make any sense, and I'd have to tear it up and start over again. Or I would find new data that would overturn what I'd previously thought. And just the sheer enormity of it really involved a lot of research. Yeah.
And epistemic humility.
And hopefully.
We were just talking about that offline. So making an inside reference. Okay, so you a huge premise in the book, the first part of it. Not asking you to give everything away because it really is worth the read. It's a fun read, but you're also digesting a lot of what ails us right now civically. Tribalism actually has evolutionary roots. So I was hoping you could expound on that reality and how it shows up in us today.
Yeah. This to me is endlessly fascinating. And I think that there's several things in the book that when you get them, everything will kind of click into place for you. So this is my pitch to your listeners. I think the book is like $15. I promise you, I don't know that I will be able to fix anything. I promise you will be slightly less baffled by the political world we find ourselves in if
I
you read
thought
it.
we're going to be better looking, 6 inches
Yeah,
taller.
yeah,
And,
yeah. You'll lose weight. You'll
Yeah.
gain height. You'll get all those things. Yeah. So the evolutionary roots of tribalism. We are a hypersocial species. We're not just social. We're hypersocial. We are as not just primates but humans. We are an incredibly social, cooperative, interdependent species that goes way, 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 way back. And there are really good reasons for that. In the book, I'm using the word tribalism in the pejorative sense, in the sense that we would say partisan. But in the same way that I can say partisan and mean a bad thing, I don't necessarily mean that political parties are inherently bad. Ditto with tribes. I think community's wonderful. I think being a part of a community is very important. And in fact, I think a lot of the political rancor that we find ourselves in is because people are increasingly adrift in terms of a place to belong and they find a new home in politics. So I'm using the word tribalism in the pejorative sense of being reflexively prone towards othering, reflexively prone towards enemy seeking, and just dogmatically, yay, my team, regardless of what the reality is, mean spirited, all of those things. So we have this inbuilt pro-social, interdependent, tribal nature that makes total sense because from a positive standpoint, we are able to, as tribes living in the Serengeti 300,000 years ago, if we form a clique and we share child rearing together, we all agree that if you go to the bathroom and watch your kids in case a wolf eats you, we increase the likelihood that the tribe will survive. If we share resources, I'm sick, but you let me have some of the giraffe that you killed, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to cover you later. There's all sorts of really good reasons that we want to pair up and form a tribe, all of which is good. There are these sort of preemptively aggressive elements that seem to be bred into human beings as well. And the theory that I promulgate in the book here is predicated on a couple of bottleneck moments that we have in human history. It's weird to think, but human beings have been endangered species at least twice over the course of our history. Homo sapiens, the species that we're a part of, are about 300,000 years old. When Corey and I were in high school, we were supposed to be 200,000 years old. Then we found like a jawbone in North Africa. We suddenly realized we were 100,000 years older than we thought we were. But the immediate antecedents of Homo sapien, Homo erectus, and the other kind of subcategories within there are about 1.5 million years old. And those would be anatomically modern people who walked upright, killed things with sticks, buried the dead, used fire, probably had language. So if we were to run into them, we'd probably interact with them, although they wouldn't quite be us, but they'd be close enough that we could call them people, we could call them humans. So in the course of that 1.5 million years that precedes humanity, there are a couple of moments where, due to intense climatological issues, the human genome shrinks dramatically. There's a moment where the amount of human beings on the planet, our whole species, is about the population of Bixby, Oklahoma. It's like 30,000 people. And in an area of Africa that's about the size of Rhode Island. And that's the whole of our race. And that goes on for, I want to say, 100,000 years. That's a very long time to be under really, really intense resource competition. So in times of plenty, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you don't really need to be aggressive, because if there's plenty of fruit and bison around and my tribe runs into your tribe and we both want to get the bison, if it starts getting kind of aggressive, we can just walk away because we can go find other bison elsewhere. It's not a really big deal. But if we're under really, really intense caloric deprivation and we both wander into the same valley and there's really juicy grapes and there's really chubby bison, and there's just those. Whoever's more aggressive is going to end up being the one that has enough calories to make more warriors when we do get into a conflict. And if you get a particular tribe that is preemptively aggressive, that's not just we're going to eat this, and if you fight us, we're going to fight you off, but sends out patrols to make sure that nobody else comes in to get our bison and our grapes, that more assertive, aggressive, reactive is not the right word, preemptively territorial group is going to get the more resources. And so I think that has been inbuilt into us, that we have not just this cooperative element of our being of we want to form communities, but also we have an inbuilt, very deep defensive mechanism to preemptively defend our community from incursions from foreign communities and to defend the resources of our community from deprivations of outside communities. And all of this means that we're not just in an idyllic state until an enemy is a threat to us. We are actively looking for an enemy. The need for an enemy precipitates the existence of the enemy. And I think that on a benign level, this is where sports rivalries come from. I think sports are good, by the way. I myself am not a sports guy. I think it's literally I've got some kind of weird neurodivergent thing where I don't like football. I wish I did. But we naturally fall into these rhythms of being competitive, and it feels very natural to us because it is very natural to us. Like it's if aliens came down, they might be like, "Why do you guys form squadron? Like you form military squadrons, and then you fight over a dead pig on a field? Why? That's weird." And we'd be like, "What are you talking about? This is completely normal. We naturally like to split into two groups and to compete against each other, and that's a benign expression of that inner rivalry. But we do have a need for a rival in us. I think that it is healthy when that is funneled into a benign competition like sports or economic competition between companies or my softball team's trying to raise more money for charity. Those are all perfectly fine, very good things to do. Where it gets problematic is when it results in war.
Yeah.
Or it goes from like, I really like Greek people because I'm Greek and I hang out at the Greek community center, to the Greeks are the greatest race in the world and all the races are subhumans, or whatever the thing is. When it goes from that kind of benign, not too serious expression of competition to outright existential warfare, that's when it becomes really problematic. And when it gets into politics, it becomes really problematic because politics functions best when it's pretty boring and pretty quotidian.
Yeah.
And we're arguing about procedure and math. It functions worse and worse when it turns into a proxy holy war, because my team is your team is evil and I have to defeat your team. And if your team wins, it represents the destruction of my team and it represents my team being debased. And I've got to fight you now. And you don't want to get yourself into that category, because it might well be that your team has some good ideas. It might well be that maybe your team has mostly bad ideas, but my team's got some blind spots on it. And we need your team to stress test my team, which goes back to that earlier model of like what we want to have is a country of neighbors who are opponents with each other and not enemies that are afraid of each other.
Right, right. One of the premises that you put forth in the book, as you put it, is tribalism comes first. The alleged reasons for it are of minimal importance. One of the illustrations I really appreciated was the Protestants and the Catholics in soccer, football, as they would call it, I guess, in Scotland, right? Could you share a little bit about that illustration?
Yeah. So I spend part of the year in Scotland. I've been going over there for coming up on 20 years now. So I spend a lot of time in Edinburgh. And there are these ongoing rivalries between the Celtics and the Rangers in Edinburgh, and the Hearts and the Hibs, which is the corresponding team. And I find it kind of funny because I know the Scots very well at this point. They're all on a spectrum of atheism to apathy. Like there's like 3 Christians in the whole of Scotland. I'll introduce you if you're over there, Corey. You can I'll introduce you to the 3 people that go to church. But they still hate each other, and you'll talk to them and you're like, wait a minute, like none of you believe in God, and like. And you're all and you're like, no, I hate them. Oh, the Rangers, I don't like them at all. No, I don't like the Rangers. You're like, what? Like, what? But why? And you're like, well, they're Protestant flavored atheists. I'm a Catholic flavored atheist. and they've somehow managed to keep the sectarian conflict going even after they don't believe in God anymore. But it kind of makes sense when you realize that what we naturally do is we figure out ways to bifurcate ourselves and then manufacture this discontent and manufacture this rivalry. We don't need much of an excuse to do it. We're really good at finding excuses.
Yeah.
I think religion's actually a really good example of that. I myself am a low wattage atheist. So I don't think there's a God or an afterlife. I hope I'm wrong. Like,
Yeah.
I'm rooting for Corey to be correct. Like, if it turns out that if I get struck by lightning and I find myself at the pearly gates, I'm not going to be like, oh damn, I'm wrong. I I wish there'd been eternal blackness forever. So I'm pretty pro religion, and like you look at Christianity is a pretty good example. I think, like, when you read the New Testament, Christ is very big on, like, hey, like, put the sword down,
Yeah.
turn the other cheek. It is an ostentatiously forgiveness-based, nonviolent religion. It's like the Amish, basically, and somehow that got mangled into the Crusades. I'm not using that to pick on Christianity. I think that can happen with anything. I think you can take any ism
Yeah.
and then weaponize it as a means to do tribal warfare on another tribe.
Right, right, right. So one of the other things that stood out for me that you addressed in the book is that something's changed in the last couple decades, maybe 2 or 3 decades. You cited a Pew Research study and I'll just quote from it here. In 1994, only 21% of Republicans viewed the Democratic Party as very unfavorable, and only 17% of Democrats viewed the Republican Party that way. Now, fast forward to 2022, that number has risen to 72% among Republicans and 63% among Democrats.
Yeah.
What the hell happened?
It's probably gone up since then, I'm guessing.
I'm
Now that
guessing.
we're in the year of our Lord 2025, it's
Yeah.
probably teeteringly high. That's the great question. That's kind of the question that's spawning a very good cottage industry of people trying to tackle this. I tried out lots of different approaches on this to try and figure it. So my original thought was that it was just that America had defeated all of our external nemesis, that we defeated the Soviets, we defeated the Nazis, and then, absent having an enemy, we went, well, I guess I hate Democrats. And we turned on each other. And I do think there's a touch of that in that when we have an external nemesis, we do get much more chummy with each other. But it doesn't really fully explain, say, the rancor of the 1960s, where there were lots of assassinations going on, there were bombings going on, and we had the Soviet Union at that time. So that doesn't fully account for it. So I had to go, okay, that can't be the proximate cause. I don't think it's electoral, although I do think our electoral system compounds matters. I don't think that it is the underlying problem. And the reason I say that is, as we are talking, the Dutch government has just collapsed. They've been having issues the last few years where they've got their populist conservative party that's in a coalitional agreement with their liberal party, and it's been rancorous over there. France, which has a very different electoral system than us, in fact, has an equivalent of ranked choice voting, has been extremely contentious the last 10 years with Marine Le Pen and their populist movement going up against Macron. The United Kingdom, very different electoral system. I don't think anybody's accusing British politics of being placid and staid and everybody being chummy together. They all hate each other just as much as we do. So I look at that and go, okay, it's not a quirk of America because it's happening across the world in the developed world. I don't think it's socioeconomic, although there are a lot of people that think that, where people that are more progressive in their politics than me kind of like the idea that inequality is precipitating this, that inequality is a stressor on civilization, and that as that goes up, umbrage goes up, and it makes the country fray. There might be something to that, but I don't think that that's likely either, for the same reasons that I just mentioned, that we can look at other countries that are more egalitarian in their income distribution that still have these problems that are going on. So where I arrive at is, I think that the primary problem, or the primary, I shouldn't say problem, the primary change is technological. And I think we're living in a period most similar to the invention of the printing press. I hasten to add, glad we had the printing press, glad we have it, glad we have the internet. But it explains a lot of the umbrage going back. So you go back to Martin Luther and the invention of the printing press. Martin Luther, and I don't say this as a slight to Lutherans, he didn't have new ideas. All of Luther's very radical ideas introducing Protestantism had been floating around for centuries before him. There was John Wycliffe. There was an English cleric that wanted to print the Bible in the vernacular of the people. All of the ideas had previously existed. The difference was that previously, when a monk or a priest would promulgate these ideas against the wishes of the Catholic Church, they could not only kill or quiet that monk, they could snuff out the ideas and go, we're going to confiscate these documents that have been written by hand on parchment. We're going to put them in the Vatican Library, and you literally have to come get permission from a priest if you want to read them, but we're not going to let regular people read this stuff, even if you're a lord. You just don't get to do that. Printing press gets invented. And now Martin Luther can crank out his ideas faster than the Catholic Church can suppress them. And the result is that the monopoly that the Catholic Church had on the truth is now broken. You now kind of get to choose. Now, what the Europeans decided to do for 300 years was figure this out using a sword. And they had horrible, horrible, bloody wars for 300 years of Catholics and Protestants just murdering each other across Europe before they finally kind of arrived at a standstill of maybe we just let everybody figure out what they want to do on their own. We don't make it officially and exclusively determined by the state. But that invention unlocked this great tumult that propelled society through that. I think that we're probably living through something very similar with the internet and with social media, and weirdly with television. I think television might actually be more responsible for this than the internet in many ways. Starting with television, there's a really great book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam that tries to figure out why has American third places, civil intermediate institutions, that is to say places that are neither work nor home, why have they declined? The Lions Club, Freemasons, the Gardening Club, all that stuff. And his rather exhaustive research basically goes, it's TV. Television did it because it used to be that, prior to TV, you got bored. You had to go out. So you'd join a club. TV's great. It's cheap. It requires very little energy. And so people are increasingly at home. They spend less time joining organizations and clubs. And I think that this increases the amount of political rancor. So I being the friendly atheist character here, I appreciate that I think churches had a really ameliorative effect for a very long time in American politics, and that in Oklahoma, where I grew up, not that long ago, I was born in the 80s, people for most of my life really related more to their church identity than they did to their political identity. And that meant when you were at church, I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, but you're a deacon, and our religious identity is more important to us than our political identity. So I'm very capable of humanizing you. And as we spend less time in these mixed groups, we lose the ability to humanize the people that we disagree with. And as we lose these groups, we shift our identity into politics, which kind of becomes the last man standing. And you couple that with the advent of cable news, and the American media landscape goes from being something that is predominantly local with an hour-long national television news broadcast that is very, very banal and very unobjectionable to a very different model. So if you go to like 1955, there are 3 national television channels in the United States. And because there's just 3 of them, none of them can afford to specialize whatsoever. They all have to be incredibly broad. They can't offend the center of the country. So they have to be palatable to Republicans and Democrats both. And they only have about an hour to do it, which means that the majority of news is going to be through newspapers in your local area, which don't tend to be super partisan. If you get into like local politics, like NIMBYism right now, NIMBYism's not really a Republican or a Democrat thing. It can be, but it really, that's not the proximate cause of it. In Oklahoma, what we're arguing about 20 years ago is going to be very different than what they're arguing about in Philadelphia. But as we get national cable television, the shift starts to happen where we go from local news to national news. And national news has to be something that appeals to everybody, and that's probably going to be a big wedge issue as opposed to a local, more quotidian issue. and then you get to the internet and you get social media. And again, I hasten to add, I'm very pro technology, but all I'm highlighting is the birth pains that come from this. Prior to social media, the gatekeepers were pretty strong in the United States, and you to get mass amounts of information out there, you kind of needed to go through a gatekeeper like the Washington Post or the New York Times. For good or for ill, that meant that there was a consensus within the American body politique. There was a pretty tight Overton window. With the internet coming in, with social media becoming ubiquitous, with people like me being able to do a podcast on my own, people like you being able to do a podcast with the Democracy Now! Network, I think, we're able to really, really expand that field and go long tail as opposed to broad, where you can have people drill down in a very, very specific niche. And also you can have nutbags just go wherever.
Right.
And the result is that there's really not an Overton window that we're all participating in. And so you add all of this up, you have this sort of implosion of strong communities, strong social communities, paired with a shift from local or state-based politics to national politics, which tend to be wedge issues, combined with this reduction in the Overton window, and you get this kind of perfect storm of highly partisan, very emotionally evocative stories that tend to hijack our tribal brains in the same
Right.
way that stuff that involves porn does pretty well because we like to reproduce, and stuff that likes food does pretty well. So that creates this concoction. So long story short, I think that it's probably an outgrowth of technology where society has not caught up to the technology yet, and we're kind of caught flat foot as it is as we're adjusting to these new developments.
So when I'm looking at, yeah, you rightly point out that some of our base instincts are being played. We're being played like a fiddle by media and new media in a lot of senses. Just pulling one of the quotes that really struck a chord with me: "Television is at its most engaging when tapped into the most visceral human emotions of fear, sex, and tribe." I immediately thought of that's why Survivor is so popular,
Yeah.
but also the news-oriented programs are hitting upon those same visceral human emotions, if you will. But this is my question, though: is there are the most popular podcast in the world, arguably, is still Rogan, who goes 2.5, 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
When you go 2.5, 3 hours, that there is, I don't know if you listen to Rogan, but my argument is that dude can get pretty nuanced.
Yeah, that's
Whether
true.
he has researchers helping him prep or he's doing a lot of the prep himself. Obviously he can talk about it with his when MMA guys come on or other comedians come on. But when he gets a neuropsychologist on there, he's
Yeah,
speaking in a pretty in-depth, nuanced way for a couple, 3 hours.
I agree.
So I'm wondering, what is the emergence of podcasts? If I'm right, or if I'm just looking through rose-colored glasses, what does that indicate about the appetite, perhaps, for nuance? Or I would think of it as like empty calorie content,
Yeah.
as well as the future viability, the way you would refer to it as the modern media landscape.
That is a phenomenal question, and I welcome the pushback. The part of the book that I am least confident on is the second section, because there are so many different causes that could be a part of this. So that's where I landed. But I welcome people proving me wrong on that, so that we can course correct and figure out what the actual underlying difficulty is. No, that's a really, really good point. You're right. Joe Rogan's the most popular podcast in the world, and I would agree with you. He is nuanced, and I would say he is. I would say nonpartisan. I know he's a Trump guy now, but I think it's
At
very
one point, he
difficult
was
to
a Bernie guy.
he was a
Yeah,
Bernie guy.
yeah,
And I think that Joe Rogan's very difficult to put in an ideological box. I think
yeah.
he's say what you will about Rogan. I think he's a fairly independent thinker. And so that is a very good indication. Um, part of it, part of it, I think, is the nature of the medium. And maybe this is flattering to me and to you. It might be that podcasts are part of the solution to this, that they're compensating for what cable television news did.
Hmm.
So I did work in cable television news for about 5 years, and I do think cable television news is sort of inherently reductive. So the show I was on, which was a good show with smart hosts, and we would have meetings. We talk about how we wanted to bring the smartest people that we disagreed with on. We didn't want to have straw men. I mean, we were trying to do everything as best we could, and even then, if we're going to do an 8-minute segment on Israel, how to fix Israel and Gaza, We've
In
got
8 minutes.
8 minutes. Yeah, with 3 hosts and 1 guest. I'm not great at math, but that means that on average, everybody's going to speak 2 minutes to be
Right.
able to talk about what they would do to fix Israel and Gaza. You're going to end up having to speak in bumper sticker talk. And you also get into these false dichotomy situations with cable television news because there are a lot of situations where there's more than 2 vantage points on a particular issue. There are 3 or 4 different ways of looking at a thing, but those become very complicated. And when you're dealing with a large audience like television, you kind of have to go for the lowest denominator, which means you have to go for a rapidly understandable situation. And going for things that are emotionally evocative works as well. So, like Roger Ailes in his book, Roger Ailes was the longtime president of Fox News, talked about how he watched Fox with the audio off. He didn't need to
Right.
listen to what people were saying. That was not really important. What he needed to do was to be able to tell what's the body language. I don't think he says this in the book, but I would assume how hot are the people on camera,
Yeah.
and what we want is drama, and drama does not come from me and Corey sitting there going, Corey, you make a really good point on ranked choice voting. I guess it's not as good as approval voting, but I do think pragmatically, that's where we are. That's not as fun as, Corey's the death of America. If he gets elected, we're going to die. It could be that in the same way that I do think we're going to adapt to technology, maybe podcast is part of the swing back the other direction, because I certainly feel that on my program, on the Political Orphanage. I really like that I have the ability when I bring a guest on, particularly one I disagree with, that I can stop it and go, hold on, before we go forward, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying X? Can you define your term for me? Like we have a lot more latitude to do that. It could be that's part of the thing moving forward. Alternately, it could be that I've misidentified the cause, in which case I would love to brainstorm with you on what you think caused it, either now or at the end of the program. I know that you'll let me turn the tables at some point.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I don't want to give away the whole book, but I will say that the last section the part where that you titled coping, and those last couple of chapters is really helpful. I appreciated it in a similar way. I won't put you in the same league as Rausch's Constitution of Knowledge,
Yeah.
but it was certainly helpful to continue thinking about this. The way I think about it is there are organizations like Braver Angels that are trying to tackle this on a nationwide level in a very organized way. I'm doing something, or Liz, my friend Liz Joyner, who I collaborate with at the Village Square, is doing entire functions in coordination with Tallahassee and now with other cities around the country. I'm trying to figure it out just at the local bar,
Yeah.
So this you're more the local bar answer to Rausch's Constitution of Knowledge,
Yeah.
which is meaningful.
Well, I think, kind of on the coping level, there's sort of 2 ways we can approach this. We can go big or we can go small. I do both in the book. So
You
going
do,
big is
yeah.
like, how do we try to make things better? I do think electoral reform would help a lot, but it's also a fairly mammoth undertaking to do that. And even if we go about doing it, it's not something that you can just snap your fingers and go, well, I'm in favor of open primaries and now everything's fine. Like we still have to do all these things. So I probably the most helpful chapter in the entire book is like, well, what can you personally do?
Yeah.
What do you have the ability to do in your life? I've thought a lot about that. Me being an independent, a political orphan who really doesn't fit in anywhere, I've had to develop these coping strategies because as we get more heated in America, a lot of the time I find myself, because I'm not on your team, I must be on the enemy team. Also, there's just like weird little things, like me being from Oklahoma, I just sound like a Republican when I'm talking to people that are in like New York. So I will sometimes find myself in the like needlessly. I will be doing stuff for Pride tomorrow, like here in DC, but I will find myself getting sort of needlessly lumped in with a group that there's a proxy fight you're trying to involve me in that I really have no business being in. So I've had to think really hard about how can I emotionally cope on my end when people are mean to me, because it doesn't feel good. But I've had to kind of like figure out kind of stoical practices of being able to deal with it. But the good news is most people, I think, actually are operating in good faith. An asterisk to that is
Right.
in person.
In person,
I don't.
yeah.
I think when I think about it, I would say 99% of the dickheads I've interacted with politically over the last decade have been online.
Yeah.
There's something about being anonymous, or at least not having to physically look at the person that you're being mean to, that really gives people latitude to be cruel. I do not find that to be the case in person. Occasionally you find the odd dickhead that really is just a jerk, but generally speaking, most people don't want to just be cruel to your face. It happens, but it's less frequent in person. And the good news is I do find that there's all sorts of strategies you can do that avoid getting into dumb arguments. I don't want to manipulate anybody. I don't want to trick anybody. But what I do want to do is avoid you and I falling into a pitfall that neither of us wanted to be in, where you think we're arguing about a thing that I'm not arguing about, and making people feel defensive when they don't need to feel defensive. So just some of the things I'm going to give out for free, although there's more in the book. One of the tools that I've learned that I think is surprisingly useful is when you're arguing with somebody, assuming that your goal is not to piss them off, which I'm guessing most of your listeners would fall in that camp. A very simple thing you can do is just try to quit using the word you when you're arguing and start saying we. So let's say theoretically, Corey and I are arguing about building the big, beautiful wall on the southern border. And Corey, for our purposes, Corey's very much in favor of building a big, beautiful wall. For our purposes, I am opposed to building a big, beautiful wall. To quote the late, great PJ O'Rourke, I think it's a $20 million subsidy to Mexican ladder companies. So I don't I don't want it to happen. If I say, like, Corey, what do you do about the fact that the majority of illegal immigrants came here legally and they just overstayed their visa? Like, what do you do about that? Well, it's very accusatory. And now I'm sort of, what I'm really saying is, Corey, you're an idiot, and defend yourself when I point out your lack of logic. And nobody likes being painted into a corner. And very, very, very few people are ever going to go, you're right, you out-argued me, I'm a moron, I'm an idiot. How did I think that? People are very, very loath to drop their team's honor or to lose status over an argument. If you say we, and I go, that's interesting, Corey. What do we do about the fact that most of the people that have overstayed their visas did so legally? By saying we, I'm implying that we are jointly tackling a question together, that we are facing the same direction, and I'm asking for assistance in tackling this, as opposed to wagging my finger at you. Another good trick, I learned this from my friend Brian Brushwood, I mentioned him in the book, is to say, instead of saying you idiot, say that's interesting. Just like build that into your regular patter, because a lot of the time it is interesting how somebody got there. But if you could say that's interesting, how did you arrive at that conclusion? That helps a lot. I find something that helps me tremendously. One of the issues I deal with personally is I sound very condescending when I argue with people. It's something that I struggle with. I'm not trying to sound condescending. I'm aware that I sound condescending. I think the reason is that in my family growing up, my mom and my dad had a stated norm in our family. Only one parent's allowed to be crazy at once. So if my dad got very angry about something and was yelling about the dishwasher, mom would just get really quiet and give him space. If mom was mad about the TV or the mailman or whatever, dad would get really quiet, give her space. So when I argue with people and they start to get emotional, my default is to get real quiet and calm, which is roundly interpreted as me going, I think you're crazy. And I'm gonna just gentle kid gloves you because you're too emotional. And that's not what I'm doing, but it's how it comes off. One of the things that I've found that lessens that effect for me is when I'm talking to somebody to just really try to paraphrase back to them what they said in the smartest way that I can. And I'm not trying to argue with them. I'll go, okay, I just want to make sure I understand where you're coming from here. You are saying that housing prices are too high, and the main reason that they're too high is that there is a concentration of corporate power, and that they're colluding on prices, and there's not enough competition, and we need to strengthen monopoly law. If I got that right? And generally, once people, if I did, and the person's like, yes, exactly, thank you. Just the fact that I have communicated, like, I heard you and I am trying to process this information is enough to remove a tremendous amount of the sting. It is a gesture of respect. By giving that respect to somebody, they're way less apt at that point to really come at you with claws, or they might correct you and go, no, 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 that's not what I'm saying. And you're like, oh, you know what? I misinterpreted this. Please, like, what are you saying? Because I
Yeah.
don't want to, I don't want to be the guy fighting the dumb argument. Um, One of the other things I learned this from Peter Boghossian, who wrote in his book How to Have Impossible Conversations. I will try to communicate to people in some way that the conversation we're having is not it's not a double effort to determine if they're evil or not. And the good news is, I do think most people are good. Like, I really do think most of the people that live in this country with us are very decent people who are trying to go about their lives and make their community better and care deeply about the state of the country as a whole. I think that's most people in the country. So fortunately, I don't have to lie to anybody about this. But when I get into arguments with people, I try to communicate something to the effect of, Corey, I can tell it's really important to you to help people. And then I'll keep talking. But what I'm communicating is, Corey, this argument that we are having over tariffs is not about whether I think you're selfish. I don't think you're selfish. I think that you care very deeply about the people that are working class jobs, and I'm not a tariff guy. You're a tariff guy. I get that you're trying to protect people's jobs, and I respect that. As we are arguing about this, I have already decided you're a good person. That is not what we're arguing about. But there's a lot of things like that that you can do that are able to couch those conversations in respect, that manage to avoid a lot of the pitfalls. You're still going to have to deal with pig-headed people. You're still going to have to deal with insufferable ideologues and insufferable partisans. But a lot of the time, you can avoid getting yourself worked up, or you can kind of move them in a positive direction, where at the end of the conversation, you both walk away and go, "That's a pretty good chat."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think somewhere right now, David Brooks is smiling and he
Yeah.
doesn't know why. You're reiterating a lot of the concepts that he covers in How to Know a Person, and some of the stuff that he was working off of from Monty Guzman's work. So yeah, it's duly noted. It's not resting condescension voice. It's
Yeah, thank you.
you're
If you and
getting
I are
quiet.
if we're ever at Smoky Joe's and I start to get real quiet because you're getting all animated about tariffs or whatever, it's not because I think you're emotionally unstable. It's just it's an inbuilt protocol I've got. Don't take offense to it.
That's great. That's great. Well, you already answered the TPNR question in a very erudite and winsome way. So I won't ask you that. So now I'll give you the opportunity to turn the tables on me. And yeah, like you indicated, what questions do you have?
Yeah, well, you know what? As I said, I am least confident in my assessment of why everything went crazy. It's the best argument I've come up with yet, but I have found other arguments that could conceivably explain why partisanship got so bad. What is your explanation? Do you have an alternate explanation? If you generally agree with mine, do you have another explanation that you think would be a close second?
I don't think it's an overarching explanation, but I think there are a couple of major ingredients to work into your analysis. One is simply the what we've been feeding our brains for 35 years plus or minus, and then in a whole other way, once Facebook and Instagram and social Twitter and that became it hit critical mass. So what I mean is, when I was younger, when I first started driving, is right about the time that Rush Limbaugh came on the scene. So AM radio, I was listening to more sports radio than Rush. But you turn on Rush, and he was basically creating a format that now has proliferated, and it's being repeated. Not just in radio, but obviously in podcasting. You listen to the first 15 minutes of a monologue, and he is helping his audience basically rehearse in their cars or wherever they're listening, why the left is stupid, why the left is wrong, or you listen to Mark Levin, why the Democrat Party wants to kill you, and they're rehearsing it literally every day.
Yeah.
Now, oftentimes it's one way in, and we don't often have a way to engage and test our own theories, and we get this input without processing it, without it being tested, and then occasionally when we do, it seems just completely alien and surprising to us that someone might disagree with our assessment that the Democrat Party wants to kill you. So we're rehearsing it in that way. The other thing is, yes, we have our go-to websites, our favorite pundits in podcasts, and it's more to your point, it is building upon the a proven business model that Denver Riggleman was the first one I talked to. Others have studied this, that it is appealing to something in our brains. There's a literal chemical reaction that is similar, if not exactly the same, to when we get a hit of crack. So our
Really? Yeah.
brains are responding to stimuli that appeal to anger and fear. Our brains, because of what you talk about a lot in your book, that we're responding to it in the same way as when we get a hit of certain types of drugs. So and then it also means that we're coming back for more. So
Yeah, and
I think
that's definitely there. By the way, like when I worked on the Hill, 90% of my job was getting screamed at by old people who were listening to Rush Limbaugh or were watching Fox News or whatever, because I was working for a Democrat at the time, and it kind of, my assessment of the situation was it was mostly older guys who were retired who were really angry, and I think a they were struggling to find meaning in the period of life that they were in, having left their job, and particularly for a lot of older guys, that's why they got up in the morning, and they kind of shifted over to, well, I'm a watchdog now. But then the other bit was it was a really intoxicating neurological cocktail. Like when you're engaged in rage, you get a combination of cortisol, which is not fun. That's the stress hormone. You also get adrenaline, which wakes you up. It's a stimulant. And you get dopamine, which is a feel-good chemical. And a lot of people are like, I'm willing to take that cortisol to feel awake, to feel alive. Rage makes me feel alive. So there's literally an addictive nature to it. I'm very much agreeing with you on that.
yeah, for sure. So, like I said, I think you're very much onto something. But there are a couple of, if you were to expound on this book or do a part two to the book, or perhaps in the paperback edition or what have you, that maybe those are a couple other ingredients. But I think there's a lot more to it. Um, there's a whole other element of how government itself has gone. American governance has gone, and the incentive structures that don't incentivize what Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan famously
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
That don't incentivize Republicans and Democrats getting together and developing relationships across the aisle. But it's more incentivized to get a tweet that goes viral,
Very much
or
so.
one of those viral moments that you capture, 10 seconds of a cabinet member coming to a committee hearing and getting burned by your Congress
Yeah.
member.
And just
So
the way we have it electorally structured, like so me being from Oklahoma, I did an episode on urban planning a couple of years ago, and I interviewed mayor of my hometown, Oklahoma City, David Holt, and he's a Republican. He's in Oklahoma, and this is like 3 years ago, by the way. And I'm looking at his biography as the Republican mayor of Oklahoma City. He's brought back the Civil Rights Commission. He marches in the Gay Pride Parade. I'm going through his Twitter account, which is very positive. Like, it doesn't have anything about, we have to flush out the evil Democrats. It's like very like, let's all come together. We all live in Oklahoma City, yay. And I talked to him and I went, I don't mean to be rude here, but you strike me as rather out of step with your national party. Why
mm,
is it that why are you operating like this, which is a kind of Republican I would very much like, as opposed to everybody else? And he didn't even pause. He's like, oh, we have open primaries. That's it. And I
yeah,
went, really? And he went,
yeah,
yeah. He goes, look, here's the deal. If we had closed primaries in Oklahoma City, I wouldn't be here because I would not be sufficiently conservative for the Republican Party, and then I wouldn't get on the ballot. And the Republican would probably beat the Democrat. So the whole election would just be whoever's the most conservative in the Republican Party. As it is, because we have an open primary, I am broadly appealing to many Republicans and moderates and Democrats. I am popular enough to get on the ballot, and there are other Republicans and Democrats, but I am broadly appealing to the majority. And so I as the guy that is not the flinty, hyper extremist dude, do quite well. But
yeah.
that's an artifact of the electoral system they have there. Whereas if you're in a congressional district in most of the country where we don't have open primaries, you are really only doing in the majority of congressional districts, the real election is the primary. The
Yeah.
turnover is very low from party to party. Have you had Catherine Gale on your program, Corey?
No, I'll write it
You
down though.
you should definitely get Catherine Gale on. She wrote a book called The Politics Industry, that I borrow and hopefully cite liberally in my book. But she talks about all the incentive structures that are in place electorally, and for most of the big elections in the country, at least in congressional districts, if you're in a district that's 70% Republican, 30% Democrat, you don't have any incentive to reach out to the Democrats because the Republican's going to win in that district unless something goes horribly wrong, which means the only threat to my political career is getting primaried by another Republican for being insufficiently conservative. Or ditto, if we're in the Bronx and I'm a Democrat, I'm going to get primaried if I'm insufficiently progressive. And if I start being chummy with people across the aisle from me and people see that, that's just ammunition that somebody can use to shoot me in the back from my own party. So the incentive structure is such that it facilitates ignoring constituents that aren't a part of your party, and it encourages you to be more extreme in order to stave off a vanguard action from getting primaried. So I think the electoral part's a big part of this.
Now that you mention it, so first of all, open primary in Oklahoma explains why Oklahoma has
Well,
as one of its.
just in the city, I should say. It's not in the congressional
Oh, it's not.
districts.
Oh, it's not.
It's not at the level of governor.
I was
But
going to
in
say
Oklahoma City, though.
one of your senators is a radical Marxist left-wing lunatic. James Lankford. It's depending on the day.
Yeah.
Um, I'm kidding, obviously, but now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if California has more closely held U.S. House races than a lot of, partly because there's a lot of U.S. House seats here in the state, but partly because I think it's the open primary. So in my district, California 27, in that race I was talking to you about earlier, the 2020 race, Mike Garcia, the Republican, beat Christy Smith by 333 votes, where almost 350,000 people voted.
Wow.
So it's a very, very closely held district. If you look at the state assembly, the state senator, where Suzette Valladares, the Republican one, as a state senator, we have a Democrat who's an assembly member. They're similarly closely held. And that is because the primaries, basically, the top two performers, regardless of party, end up on the ballot in November.
Which is very, very smart. I think that's, I would expand upon that. I would do the top five. But that being said, though, I would rather have your system than what we've got in Oklahoma, where I live in Virginia now, incidentally, but I'm spiritually Oklahoman forever. In Oklahoma, it's top Republican, top Democrat. And that means that in a congressional, the majority of the time, the Democrat is going to be a ceremonial character. That we're now going through the motions of democracy. There's a kind of stop valve there where if the Republican shoots a guy and eats him, maybe the Democrat can win. But the reality is that the only competitive race is the primary. That top two system works much better. Sometimes it offends people, and I think that they're wrong. They'll look and go, why am I having to choose between two Democrats? There's not even a Republican on the ballot, or vice versa. There's two Republicans and there's no Democrat on the ballot. And the reason is it's much better. I would much rather be in a district where if the Democrat's going to win it, I get to choose between the top two Democrats, and I get to choose between the moderate and the progressive, or I get to choose between the moderate Republican and the extreme conservative. That to me is much better because I have more say than I get a Republican or a Democrat who's doomed. Or I get a Democrat who's foreordained and the Republican's just a ceremonial plot point. Like I think that that's a better system you guys have.
Do you know if the ranked choice system in Alaska held? Because I know that there was a lot of pushback after they weren't. It's the Republican Party who wanted much more pure represent, or right wing or Trumpian or whatever you want to call it. Do you know, has that held? Has ranked choice held in Alaska?
I think it got modified. I don't think they scrapped it entirely. I could be wrong about this. I'll say it was, for those of us that favor electoral reform, the last election was not a good one. Like in the book, which was written before the last election, that's something that I was kind of bullish on because New York City had implemented ranked choice voting. Alaska had, I think, top three open primaries. And there were several municipalities that were doing it. It got really set back in the last election, which was sad to me because that was one of the few things that I could be like, well, this one thing's going pretty well.
Yeah.
I think they dropped some of it. I don't think they dropped all of it, but I could be wrong on that. And it's a shame for anybody. I don't know how much you've elaborated on that on your program at all, but for people that are unfamiliar with what we're talking about, the default in the United States is closed first past the polls. And that means that the Republicans and the Democratic parties both operate as gatekeeping institutions rather than clubs. And the Republicans and the Democrats both nominate their candidates, and then everybody else gets to choose between them. That's the standard way that we do it. The problem with that is a fraction of the population actually shows up to vote in the primaries, and it tends to be the people that are the most partisan.
Yeah.
So what you end up getting is the most conservative members of the Republican Party and the most progressive members of the Democratic Party select their candidates. And those of us that are broadly in the middle now have to choose between people that really aren't emblematic of us, even if we're in that particular party. So what I would much prefer is I think the Republicans and Democrats should absolutely be able to nominate their own candidates, but I don't think that they should actually be the ones putting candidates on the ballot. I think
that's
that
interesting.
what I would do is just you come up with either the top 5 people in terms of signatures to get on the ballot, get in, or you've got a threshold cutoff. You have to get 10,000 signatures. I'm not particular about how you do it. I'm sure there'd be ups and downs to it, but basically, like, the teachers union should be able to endorse whoever they want, but I don't think that every American election should be whoever the teachers union picked and whoever the chambers of commerce picked.
Right.
I think Chamber of Commerce can endorse whoever it wants. But the Republican and Democratic parties, in my view, ought to operate as clubs which support and campaign for their preferred candidate, not as quasi-governmental entities that operate as gatekeepers, which is where we are. And occasionally I get pushback on that, where people will go, well, what if the preferred Republican candidate doesn't get enough signatures to get on the ballot? In that case, I would say then it's a really bad candidate, and it literally is. If he can't get enough signatures to be on the ballot, then he's literally not a democratic representation of the people in the state.
Right.
You can't get the minimum to get on there. So that would be my preference on where we would go. It would look more like the caucus system, where not in terms of the chaos, but like strictly speaking, caucuses are the party runs a thing and then they just let the state know this is the guy we selected. As opposed to running a primary where the state itself runs the election. And you could get into the nuance, but basically that's what I want. Top 5 open primaries. I want the top 5 candidates in order of ballot signatures to be on the list, and the Republicans and Democrats can endorse whoever they want. And they could, in fact, I'm totally fine with that being even more restrictive. You have to be a Republican to vote in the Republican primary. You got to be a Democrat to vote. That I'm totally fine with that. It's a private organization, but I don't want the options on the ballot to go through those as gatekeepers. I want them to be endorsers and campaigners, not gatekeepers.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We have had a few conversations about that. The one that stands out for me is the one that we had with Danielle Allen. She had a whole series last year in the Washington Post. She's a prophet at Harvard, and she's done a number of papers and a whole series, pieces of which that she published over the course of the year in 2024. Broadly speaking, renovations of democracy. So she explored everything from expanding to the House to ranked choice versus open primaries. She explored a whole bunch of issues about how we can make this a more representative democratic republic, constitutional republic. It was really really helpful.
I don't mention expanding the House in the book, but I've come around to that position. I think that would be a really good thing too. So, like right now, the number of constituents in a congressional district is about 700,000 people.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Crazy.
700,000 people. That's like, to put that in perspective, when the Constitution was signed, I think maybe like 3 states in the entire Union had more than 700,000 people in them.
Yeah.
Like most states were smaller than that.
Right.
To really put this in perspective, when George Washington was president, you could just go into the White House and talk to the president. Like he had to make a rule, because he got so sick of it. Because people would just walk into the White House and like burst into his office and be like, "Hey, I'm visiting from Cleveland. I just wanted to see how the country's going." And it was so infuriating to him that he had to make a rule that you could do open hours with the president, but you could only do it Thursday after 2, and you had to wear a jacket. Like that's how small we were. So yeah, I would like, originally she probably brought this up. Madison wanted it to be you just keep adding members to the House indefinitely, and a congressional district's always about 30,000 people,
right?
Which would be very different, because like campaigning for 30,000 people, you could meet a significant amount of the people in your district. They would know you as your neighbor. They would know you personally. Sure. 700,000 people, I have to run a mass media campaign. I have to get donors involved. I have to figure out how to buy airtime. There's no way I can actually campaign with everybody. So I think she's onto something with that.
For sure. So we've covered a lot. Can
I ask you one more question?
Sure, yeah.
Do you have any tips you can give me? I've got that coping chapter that we alluded to. Do you have any skills or skills that you've used to get along better with people in conversation that I don't bring up in the book that I can steal from you?
So just to prove the fact that I am a dick, the first thing I thought of was tips. Just remember the bridges freeze before the roads surface. So that's my tip.
Nice.
Yeah. No.
Thank you. Yeah,
How
good.
to improve the book? No.
Well, no, it's the book's written. So this is just for my personal life now to help me when I go to the bars.
Oh, uh, so it. I do think you're onto something. I do think that the art of actively listening, how you're describing it, is like a Jedi mind trick that you pull on people. When you're engaged in a conversation, and sometimes it's done with really good questions, the way that you just did with me, uh, that you draw people out of themselves. And the reason I refer to it as a Jedi mind trick is when you get folks to share who they are with you, whether it's you ask a question, you're very thoughtful about how you ask questions, right? Like, why the hell did you come up with that? That's not a great way to ask a question, but you, did you have a mentor in your life that really influenced you? Something along those lines, to ask as a way of understanding how a person arrived at a position,
Yeah.
or if you're trying to pick up a girl or something like that, asking the girl, about themselves, or a potential romantic partner about themselves. The reason I say it's a Jedi mind trick is that they feel like they're getting to know you. The more you allow a person to come out of themselves, and in particular in a way that they're sharing their story with you, because we're story driven creatures, right?
Hmm.
That there's some sort of magic wisdom, or there's this magic thing that happens, that they're telling you about themselves, but they feel like they're getting to know you.
Mm.
So I think keep on keep on pulling on that thread. That's that. I'm not going to tell you what to come up with, because again, like, I'm sincere in saying that I love how you go about it in entering into an inquiry, having some ideas of where it might go, but being open enough, for epistemic humility, having the humility to say, "Oh wow, I wasn't expecting that. That's pretty cool." To come up with a completely different thing. So keep on pulling on. There's some threads that are going to be really interesting to see where they go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So like I said, we did cover a lot, but is there anything important we haven't discussed that you want to add? I'm going to let you plug the book and the
Hmm.
podcast and all that, but on subjects and substance, is there anything that we haven't covered yet?
I'm going to allude to some of the stuff that's in the book, and then maybe roll into the plug if that's okay.
Sure.
Some of the stuff that we didn't get into, we didn't spend too much time on the evolutionary side of it. I did talk about the bottleneck, and I talked
Yeah.
about that proactive finding an enemy element, which is definitely something that I think is going on. But there's lots of other phenomenon that we didn't get into that I think explains a lot of human nature. There's a whole chapter on Dunbar's number. For
Yeah.
anybody unfamiliar with Dunbar's number, I think Dunbar's number is like the E equals MC squared of humanity. I think it's the most important number for understanding humans and group dynamics. So there's a whole chapter on explaining that, why the cellular unit of human beings is 150, and that creates scaling issues for any group larger than that. There's a lot on religion in the book. I take an anthropological perspective on religion, which is to say that I'm not hostile to it, but I'm taking the presumption that religion is actually an evolutionary hack that our species has developed as
To get
a
beyond that 150,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
to get beyond the 150, and as a way to be able to cooperate with each other, as a way to deal with free riders. If we're a group of 150, and Corey's not carrying firewood, we're all carrying firewood. We can all sit around the fire and be like, Corey, what are you doing? We're all carrying firewood. You can't do that. We're going to kick you out, right?
That
But when we
definitely
get into
sounds like me, by the way.
yeah, that's what. When I was in Boy Scouts, I would just carry a shovel everywhere, and just everybody just assumed you're. If you carry a shovel, everybody assumes you're doing something. And but you get to 200,000 people. It's hard to keep an eye on everybody. But if we all believe that there's something greater than us, and we owe an obligation to it, then so there's a lot about that. There's a lot about going from there, that I think a lot of the political fights that we're having in the country are kind of weirdly subdued religious fights, because um, there's not, like, from a mental perspective, there's not a huge difference between religions and other isms. And I don't mean that in a way, I'm not saying that to degrade religion. What I mean is just neurologically how we process social constructs of, there's an idea that is not not rooted in the physical universe that I think is real and has meaning. Like every high college sophomore in the country can tell you that money's not real just because we think it's real, right? Well, the part of our brain that allows us to have cash or agrees that weekends are a thing, that's the same part of our brain that allows religions to operate. And religions get really, really bound up in tribes. When things become sacred to the tribe, we want to defend them, and I think a lot of that's going on right now. I talk about that in the book. So those are some of the things we didn't get into. If you like, I'll say for your listeners, if you enjoy anthropology, you enjoy evolutionary psychology, you enjoy looking at religion, that's stuff that we didn't really get a chance to cover in this otherwise very wide ranging conversation. My final plug, if I may. The book is called Tribalism Is Dumb by Andrew Heaton. That's me. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Audible as well. If you like my dulcet baritone voice, I'm the one that recorded it. It is funny. I am a trained comedian. And so I have done all of the anthropological research for you. I've crunched the numbers for you. And I'm trying to take that and distill it in a very sloppy, funny way so that it's not a chore for you. And my promise to you is, if you buy the book, I promise politics will be less baffling to you by the end of the book. The world will make a little bit more sense.
I'm interrupting here because I do have a question, and I wasn't sure if I was missing something or if there was a joke. And somewhere around page 70 something, yes, the chart on page 75. Was that a joke?
Printing error. Sorry, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Because like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, wait,
yeah,
he's saying it's the same size as this thing.
We swapped the image in the last the last version, and the text wasn't updated. So I know what you're talking about, and I need to get that fixed. But yeah,
I was waiting for like a punchline for you to like at the very end of that chapter to say, oh, and by the way. You fell for this very experiment that I was citing because that would actually be interesting. So okay.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. I need to get that corrected. Need to get a reprinting of it.
Yeah, or you might just like do a little thing at the end, like, okay, so we did the experiment.
Alternately, maybe I should like come up like Dave Barry used to, like when people would write like if they sent Dave Barry an article that he thought was really funny, he would send them a certificate of like this person wasted their time or something. Maybe I should make certificate. Anybody who emails me, like send them a certificate, like you actually read the book and you read all the attention to detail, because most people don't pick up on that. So yeah.
So it reminded me, my dad, he was for 30 years of his career, he was in education for about 35 years. So about 25 to 30 of it, he was a guidance counselor. But when he first started, he was a junior high school teacher. And I forget if it was social studies or history or something. But one of the first tests that he gave at the beginning of the year was on how to follow directions. And it was a trick. It was a trick test. He said, okay, so step one, read all of the questions before you start to answer. And then the last question was an exhortation, which is, okay, now that you've read all the questions, you don't have to take the test. It's following directions. So, half the kids are like not reading all the things. And it was his kind of, so like my dad, I'm kind of an asshole that way. Anyway, so the book, but how else can folks find the podcasts, the other books and all the great work that you're doing?
Well, I think that for your audience in particular, I do think the book is very much up your audience for what you're looking to do. This is very much of the Corey Nathan milieu. This is very much in the wheelhouse of your listeners. For people that go, you know what? I've got my own universal string theory of why things went off the rails. I don't need any more. And you want to go elsewhere. My regular program that might be of interest to you is a podcast called The Political Orphanage. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. It is so called because I am tired of the red team versus blue team dynamic. I have my own views. I have my own ideology. I would like to think that I am open to being wrong and adapting that ideology on a regular basis as data and analysis comes in. But in any event, I can declaratively say that the show is not partisan. It is rather anti-partisan in its outlook. I'm interested in how to fix things, make things better. I'm really interested in systems. And I'll just do random historical stuff periodically as well. So just in no particular order on the show in the last couple of months, I did Why is Housing Expensive? How do other countries handle housing. I had on a guest that would actually be pretty good for you, Corey, who wrote a book called "Is It Sexist? Is It Racist?" where she came up with kind of the mental models with which people assess whether something is racist or sexist or not. So there's two schools of thought on it. She's able to articulate that. I had an episode on film subsidies because that was coming up with Trump tariffs. I've done a lot on trade. I do a fair amount of economics, and generally, when Supreme Court decisions come out, I'll read the big ones and I'll bring on judges, or I'll bring on lawyers to talk about them. So it is a thinky, quasi-funny program that is kind of in the political world without being partisan.
Great. Good stuff. Good stuff. And I'll be sure to put a bunch of links in the show notes so people can find you. Heaton, it was great to talk to you again, man. I'm so glad we did this.
Good to talk to you. This was a delightful conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. You bet. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write that review. And now you can watch all these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. And I am at Corey S. Nathan, at COREYS as in Sam, NATHAN, at Corey S. Nathan. All the socials, all the things, as well as Substack. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.